Where did Israel travel after they left Mount Sinai? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Numbers on Walking Through the Bible. If you have a Bible with you, turn to Numbers 33. We're going to be reading from verses 16 to 37. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Numbers 33, beginning of verse 16. They moved from the wilderness of Sinai and camped at Kibroth-Hattaavah. They departed from Kibroth-Hattaavah and camped at Hazeroth. They departed from Hazeroth and camped at Rithmah. They departed from Rithmah and camped at Rimmon-Perez. They departed from Rimmon-Perez and camped at Libnah. They moved from Libnah and camped at Rissah. They journeyed from Rissah and camped at Kehelathah. They went from Kehelathah and camped at Mount Sephar. They moved from Mount Sephar and camped at Haradah. They moved from Haradah and camped at Makaloth. They moved from Makaloth and camped at Tahath. They departed Tahath and camped at Terah. They moved from Terah and camped at Mithkah. They went from Mithkah and camped at Hashmonah. They departed from Hashmonah and camped at Moseroth. They departed from Moseroth and camped at Bene-Jacan. They moved from Bene-Jacan and camped at Hor-Haggidgad. They went from Hor-Haggidgad and camped at Jokpathah. They moved from Jokpathah and camped at Abranah. They departed from Abranah and camped at the Zion-Geber. They moved from Zion-Geber and camped in the wilderness of Zin, which is Kadesh. They moved from Kadesh and camped at Mount Hor on the boundary of the land of Edom. In this chapter, Moses is giving the children of Israel a short history lesson about their travels from Egypt up until the point they were at then, across from Jericho, about to attack and take the land of Canaan. Why would Moses need to do this? Because this isn't the generation that actually experienced many of those things. And for some of the ones who did, they were but children and probably had a faint memory of the events. Unlike us today, who have a Bible and can turn to passages that we might forget, the Israelites didn't have this. Their history was kept by oral tradition in the beginning, and so telling Israel of their history and then recording it for future generations was necessary. In our last lesson, we talked about Israel's journey from Egypt to Mount Sinai. The places that Moses told us about are the same places we read of during our study of Exodus. Israel left Egypt and Goshen, crossed into what we call the Sinai Peninsula today, traveled south until they got to the Red Sea, turned east where they were shut in by the mountains and the Red Sea, at which point God parted the Red Sea, and they crossed over on dry land into what we call Saudi Arabia. On their way to Mount Sinai, they complained for food and water, and God sent them manna, quail, and water from the rock. They also fought and defeated the Amalekites who attacked them at Rephidim before arriving at Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, Israel received their law and built the tabernacle before leaving for Canaan. That's the part of the story that we pick up with today. As far as the names that we read of here, there are not many that we recognize. Their first two stops, however, are places we do have recorded because of the events that occurred there. In Numbers 11:35, we read, from Kibroth-Hattaavah, the people moved to Hazeroth and camped at Hazeroth. If you recall, it was at Kibroth-Hattaavah that the children of Israel complained for food, and God sent them an overabundance of quail and then punished them for eating the quail because they had murmured against him. From Kibroth-Hattaavah, they came to Hazeroth. It was there that Miriam was struck with leprosy for complaining against Moses. But apart from these two places, we did not study any of the places mentioned here until we come to Kadesh. In fact, all Numbers 12:16 said was, and afterwards the people moved from Hazeroth and camped in the wilderness of Paran. We didn't even know that Israel was at Kadesh until Numbers 13:26, when the spies returned from spying out the land of Canaan. So even though we don't know where these places are exactly, as our map indicates, adding these places in here does do one thing for us. It gives us a sense that a period of time passed between Israel leaving Sinai and arriving at Kadesh. It can be very easy to go from the end of chapter 12 to the beginning of chapter 13 and assume that Israel traveled in a straight line to Kadesh, but we would be wrong. There were 21 stops between Sinai and Kadesh. That means that the camp had to stop, the tabernacle erected, and taken down 21 times as they moved from place to place. That means we're not talking about a 3-day journey. We're talking about a few months' journey, maybe even more than half to 3/4 of a year. Realizing this adds an even deeper understanding of Scripture and a deeper understanding of how God protected his people all the way from Sinai. Verse 37, though, is where there is a lot of room for confusion. We understand that Israel arrived at Kadesh, sent the spies out. The spies brought back the bad report, and then God punished Israel with 40 years of wilderness wandering. However, unlike the 21 camps listed on the trip from Sinai to Kadesh, we don't have numerous camps during the period of wilderness wandering. We have that Israel left Kadesh and went to Mount Hor, where Aaron died, which we know took place after the wilderness wandering period had ended. What should this tell us? Like I said earlier on in this book, it would tell us that Israel remained near Kadesh, though I don't believe at Kadesh itself, because Numbers 20 would imply that they came to Kadesh a second time, which is when Miriam died and Moses struck the rock instead of speaking to it. That means that they didn't wander aimlessly for 40 years, but remained in the wilderness of Zin near Kadesh, according to verse 36. Thus, no future camps until they leave for Mount Hor. Our study of Deuteronomy, where another accounting of this takes place, will confirm our conclusions here. We'll continue with this history, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Numbers 33, verses 38 to 49, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.